Is that yours? Did I take that?
You know what?
No, I've got one too.
Oh, we all have. Okay. Yep. Where did oh, here it is. Okay. We should not have appointments during meetings because nobody's reading the materials.
Okay.
Appointments during campaigns. It's not fair to the people running.
Well,
To the people.
they're all gonna come back.
This is the second time. Yeah, it's just
We don't have the chicken in the
time to do it.
Did you know that? That's low income.
Good evening. I want to welcome everyone now to the business portion of the Charlotte City Council meeting for September 25th. We have had our public forum, and now we're ready to start our regular portion of our meeting. As always, we will start with introductions, and we'll start with our clerk.
Good evening, Emily Kunze, Deputy City Clerk.
Good evening, I'm Carlenia Ivory, District 2.
Good evening, I'm Dimple Anjimera, District 5.
Good evening, Ed Driggs, District 7.
Patsy Kinsey, District 1.
Claire Fallon at large.
Good evening, Julie Iselt at large.
Mayor Jennifer Roberts, welcome.
Good evening, Vi Lyles, Mayor Pro Tem.
Good evening, Kenny Smith, District 6.
Good evening, Lawana Mayfield, District 3.
Marcus Jones, City Manager.
Bob Hageman, City Attorney.
Now, on our agenda, we have invocation. At our last meeting, there was confusion about what council had decided about the invocation and about what our attorney had recommended. And so we have had a committee discuss the invocation, and we'll be hearing about that in a moment, that clarified what our attorney had suggested and what council had decided. And I'm going to turn it over to our attorney to briefly summarize that committee, which is the Governance and Accountability Committee that met earlier today, chaired by Kenny Smith. He's going to give us a summary of what he is using for a guideline for the invocation going forward. Mr. Attorney.
Thank you, Mayor. So I do want to comment on your description of last week and what clearly was some confusion. And I want to indicate that to the extent that my advice to council led to that, I apologize. What I did advise the council last week, and would again tonight, is that not having an invocation is 100% legally safe. If there's no invocation, there's no legal argument that the council is engaged in some unconstitutional practice. That said, I think this provided us a really good opportunity to dig in deep. There was a very important decision out of the Fourth Circuit 2 months ago from Rowan County, and this gave us an opportunity with the Governance and Accountability Committee today, and I've shared with all of you about a 5-page legal memo, as well as what I'm going to walk through tonight, which are recommended guidelines for invocations going forward. So the case out of Rowan County did find that Rowan County's practice, based on 4 factors that came together, rendered that practice unconstitutional. Again, I think it gave a good opportunity for us to revisit and take a look at our practices. My conclusion is that our practices don't go as far as Rowan County's and are not therefore unconstitutional. But it gave us an opportunity for me to provide you with the guidelines, some areas where cities across the country can and have gotten in trouble with certain kind of invocation practices, and a couple of recommendations. So what I will touch on are 2 things. 1, content, and 2, practices that might be found to be coercive, something that I advise you to stay away from. So regarding the content, what our courts have said is the purpose of government invocation is to lend gravity to the occasion and to reflect upon shared ideals and common ends. Invocation should be ceremonial and civic in nature. Here's a key area to stay away from. If over time, invocation practices are deemed to be proselytizing, attempting to convert, or denigrating other faiths or non-believers, that's a problem. So we need to stay away from proselytizing and denigration of other faiths and non-believers. Finally, invocations do not have to be prayers. And this body, in fact, has had invocations that aren't prayers. Moment of silence is certainly acceptable, as are readings of inspirational poetry or literature. So that's what I have to say about content. Regarding coercion, there's two things that the courts have pointed to that I'm advising you not to do. The prayer, the invocation is for the body, and what we don't want to do is treat anybody in the audience in a way that they feel like they are being coerced to participate in something they don't believe in. So my ask of you is, as you begin the invocation, it is better not to ask the audience to join you in prayer. And second, and I think the mayor will speak to this before the invocation tonight, we should not be directing the audience to stand. When government gives a direction, it sounds like an order, and directing folks to stand and participate is a problem area. So with that, Mayor, what I'll say in summary, I think the practices that you've had, as long as I've been around, have been inclusive and respectful. I cannot think of a single instance when anybody around this dais gave an invocation that was denigrating to other faiths or to non-believers. I'm comfortable with your level of understanding and knowledge of what is appropriate to begin a governmental meeting with.
Thank you, Mr. Hageman, for that clarification, and the committee for examining that earlier today. So we are going to have an invocation followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. We do have a Cub Scout troop who's going to help with the pledge. Let me say that the invocation is a personal expression by the member intended to solemnize our proceedings. It is not an endorsement of any particular religious belief. Rather, we note and celebrate the diversity of our community, including our religious diversity and including those who do not follow a religion. You are welcome to stand, but you are not required to stand. I would, however, ask everyone to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance when we have our Cub Scout troop come down and help us with that. So we will have our invocation and Councilmember Smith.
Heavenly Father, we live in uncertain times. There's great tension in our city and country. I ask that you bestow your wisdom upon us and help each of us look inward and act outward so that we may make our city and country a better place to live. Amen.
Amen.
Now I'd like to invite Cub Scout Troop number 11 from Providence United Methodist Church, Carrie Dawson, who's the Merit Badge Counselor. Please come down to the front so you can look good on camera.
Smile.
Smile, it's okay.
It's okay.
We're here to have fun with the pledge. And the American flag is right here, young men, so we need to, there we go. And you all may start us off with a pledge.
Join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Very well done.
Thank you.
Good job. Thank you to troop number 11. We appreciate that. My computer's having problems. Gotta look on somebody. Again. Okay. So next we move to consent items, and there is only one item to be pulled. That's number 28, by Councilmember Ajmira. Others have questions that have been answered or comments they're going to make about it once we call this out. So I need someone to make a motion to approve 27 through 48 with the exception of 28.
I make the motion.
Okay, for a second? Okay. So before we vote on that, there are council members who want to speak to item number 27. And Councilmember Isel and Councilmember Smith.
I'm going to let Mr. Smith go.
Thank you. Okay. Item number 27 is a donation that the city is going to receive from the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Foundation. I would like to recognize the board chair, Mr. Will Whitley, who is here tonight. Camera wave to Will. This is a nonprofit volunteer organization that has done wondrous work with our CMPD. They have filled the gap over the past handful of years in areas of technology and other areas in which we may have budget constraints. They were helpful in the pilot program for the body cameras, remember a few years ago. Tonight, they're giving us $374,000 that will help supply Narcan to officers, pistol lights to make a safer outing at night so you don't have to do the flashlight over the hand, and then they're going to do some vehicle mitigation barriers. This totals $374,000. This group receives their funding from a one-time luncheon held in the convention center that has grown every year. This year they had over 1,200 people in attendance. Police Chief Brown from Dallas spoke, gave us, it's funny, you thought he would give us a speech on what happened in Dallas. He gave us a speech on how to be better people and get to know people that we're different from. Everybody in there was moved, but I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the group and the good work that they do in our community and what the resources they help provide CMPD, and a $374,000 donation to the city is a big deal. Mr. Whitley, we appreciate you coming down on behalf of the board, and if you'll extend our well wishes back at your next meeting. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Russell, did you want to add to that?
Councilmember Smith covered it all. Thank you
Your
for
former board member, please.
I am a former board member, and
Very
just
good.
point out that it's a police foundation that's here locally, no connection to the Washington DC Police Foundation, and therefore it's made up of all, those donations come from corporations and citizens in the area, so thank you to the community, and thank you for organizing it. Thank you.
Thank you. I also need to let the clerk read a correction to item number 7 before we vote.
It's item number 37, Charlotte water metering equipment. One of the bidders, HD Supply, has had a name change. The new name is Core and Main LP.
Okay, so that will be reflected in the record. Any other comments on those consent items? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and item 28, Councilmember Mira, this is tasers and related products. There is a part A, B, and C to this contract approval. Councilmember Mira.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is in approval of additional amount for providing tasers and related products to CMPD. And I wanted to get an understanding on our community letter regarding some of the de-escalation tools that we are using to ensure the trust in our community and our CMPD. So how would this tools be used as a de-escalation tool?
Good evening. My name is Deborah Campbell, and I was a staff support to respond to questions related to consent items. There were actually 2 questions around item number 28. One was, I think, from Ms. Kinsey about the funding. Ms. Kinsey, I just wanted to say that we will provide something in the follow-up report, not only to Ms. Kinsey, but to the rest of council. And the second question Ms. Edgemera has asked, I would like for the chief to respond to that question.
I bet you do. Good evening.
Welcome, Chief Putney.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. To answer your question specifically, the goal with the taser is to keep from having to escalate the level of force used. So when faced with active aggression, meaning there's a fight, someone's assaulting an officer, the officer can use a taser instead of punching, hitting with batons, and other things that could cause a greater degree of harm. So the goal of the taser is to keep from escalating higher than that level of control that is exerted when the taser is deployed. That is the goal of the taser.
That's it. Thank you, Chief.
Any further questions?
Approval.
Okay.
Second.
Motion to approve in a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. That's all the consent items. Now we move into, we have a zoning decision. Item number 10, rezoning petition 2017-070 by Saucy Burbank LLC. And I don't know whose district this is in.
It's in mine,
Oh, Councilmember Kinsey, District 1.
and I'm happy to move approval.
Second.
Okay. There's a motion and a second. Any comments? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Is there a motion to adopt the zoning committee's statement of
Motion to
consistency as the
adopt.
council's own?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, very good. Thank you. And there's no one signed up for that public hearing. Okay, next we have item 11, NN Inc. Business Investment Grant. Oh, there's no one signing up for this hearing. Is that correct? Okay, so there's a part A and B for this investment grant, total estimated amount of $106,000 by the city. Let's see. How many jobs are going to be created? 200 jobs.
Move the public hearing be closed and adoption of the, approval of the city's share of the business investment grant to NN for a total of $106,000.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. And just to summarize, it says a $10.5 million capital investment by the company with a creation of 200 jobs, 175 to be hired locally over the next 5 years. Okay. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thank you, NN Inc., for your confidence in our city and for bringing jobs here. Next on our agenda is the city manager's report.
We're going to pass tonight.
You're going to pass, okay.
Good report.
Have our positive word of the week.
It's great being here.
It's great being here. Okay, it's good weather today. All right, our next item, number 13, Emergency Solutions Grant Funding Recommendations. The action request is to approve the Housing and Neighborhood Development Committee's recommendation of grant fund allocations of $690,768 to 3 different agencies. And this is Councilmember Mayfield's committee, Housing and Neighborhood Development.
Yeah, so you're giving it to me now? Thank you, Mayor. I'm still trying to play catch-up
You're trying to find it too.
from the weekend. My apologies. So, for tonight, and modern technology, computers, never want to act right. Thank you. Agenda items 13 and 14, we want to do them separately. So looking at agenda item 13, just to bring everyone up to date, my colleagues tonight, we have the opportunity to approve funding for 3 agencies who are serving some of our city's most vulnerable residents, earning 30% and below of the area median income. We do believe that approval of these funds will assist supportive housing communities, the Salvation Army Women's Shelter, and the Men's Shelter by helping to rapidly rehouse individuals and families who may be living in the men's and women's shelters, providing essential services to shelter residents, and improving the quality and operation of our shelters. Having said this, I'd like to make a motion to approve the Emergency Solutions Grant Funding recommendations.
Second.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Just that these folks are serving our most vulnerable, and I'm really glad that we're able to provide some additional funding for all 3 of these very hardworking agencies. Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, and the next item is also on housing, and this is, has a part A and B with several big-ticket items. I'm sure Councilmember Mayfield is going to be very excited to explain a little more about.
I am. Thank you. So again, well, it's an exciting night for Housing and Neighborhood Development Committee, but I also want to take a moment to thank all of our committee members, my vice chair, Mr. Eggdriggs, committee member, Councilmember Kinsey, Councilmember Ivory, Councilmember Ajmira. Thank you for all of your work with
doing something honestly transformational in the history of the Housing Trust Fund. So when we look at our commitment, hopefully tonight we will have the opportunity to expand the supply of affordable and workforce housing as outlined in our October 2016 community letter by approving the Housing and Neighborhood Development Committee's housing funding support recommendations. Two of these proposed developments, Vibrant Ashley Park and Movement on Freedom, require our approval for a waiver of our housing locational policy. Both of these proposed developments are in neighborhoods that are rapidly changing, where affordable housing is greatly needed. My colleague can definitely speak to Ashley Park. I can speak to Movement on Freedom, as you've seen a lot of development happening along Freedom Drive that is both good and brings challenges. As a reminder, approval of Housing Trust Fund dollars in support of these tax credit requests provides local alignment with the state-supported developments through awards from the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency and allows for leverage of our local Housing Trust Fund dollars. The state will announce these awards in early January of 2018. Each of these developments is expected to receive a state award. On August 23rd of this year, staff presented these proposed housing funding support recommendations to the Housing and Neighborhood Development Committee. The committee unanimously voted to approve housing funding support for each of these developments outlined in our request for council action and grant a waiver of the housing locational policy for both the Vibrant Ashley Park and Movement on Freedom developments. So for those who might not be watching but may be listening, what we're asking for is for Greer Heights Seniors, $3,450,000, Movement on Freedom, $4,500,000. Glasses, good and bad. Old Concord at the Blue Line, $5,100,000. Vibrant Ashley Park, $2,160,000, and West Tarbola, $5,600,000. Approval of these requests will afford the community an opportunity to receive a total of 769 new affordable and workforce housing units in our community. I will challenge us moving forward to rethink the word affordable and really look at diverse price point housing, since affordable is subjective. Finally, I'd like to thank my committee members for their continued work around this very important issue, and I do know that there will be additional comments from one of my colleagues, but with that, I would like to make a motion to approve actions A and B, which is approve the waiver of the housing locational policy for two multifamily housing developments. Again, Vibrant Ashley Park Apartments located at the block of 2200 Ashley Road, and Movement on Freedom located at 2615 Freedom Drive, as well as B, approve the Housing and Neighborhood Development Committee's recommendation of Housing Trust Fund allocation for the following multifamily developments for a total of $20,810,000.
There was a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. And
We
I want,
We have a speaker.
3 speakers.
yep, okay. We have 3 folks signed up to speak to this, and while they're coming down, the first is Ray McKinnon. Is Mr. McKinnon here?
He might be outside.
I don't see him. John Devine? John Devine? Angie Ford?
This is Angie.
Okay, well, she's coming down. I want to also mention that the Homeless Services Network had sent an email to, I think, to all of us with a request, and I wanted to refer this to the Housing Committee with some ideas that are interesting. Of course, they support our approval of the 5 developments, but they also asked the council to work to find separate money to provide rent subsidies for the 5 developments, so that 25% of the units will be able to serve those at 30% AMI or less. This would be about a 15% ask from the city, and the estimate they have is about $500,000 a year, and they're looking for a 10-year commitment. They also would like to have a housing trust fund allocation for those getting that allocation, the city to require developments to have at least 25% of the units affordable for those at 30% AMI. And then of course, to increase the Housing Trust Fund, which we've also heard from numerous folks in the community, to have more than the $15 million, which we've been allocating. And I think with our allocation tonight, we're going to almost use the last part of our Housing Trust Fund. So we'll be...
We still have some money.
We still have some. But in any event, I wanted to refer those 3 items to your committee. They go with this approval tonight, and they're certainly worth exploring. And I want to thank the Homeless Services Network for that email and for that suggestion. And with that, we have our speaker, Angie Ford. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for that wonderful summary of my request to you tonight. Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Angie Ford. I'm an advocate for affordable housing with Helping Homeless to Housing. We are a member of the Homeless Services Network. So as you discuss this request, the allocation of Housing Trust Fund dollars to support these 5 developments, we think this is great news, and we really do applaud you for that. But the less than great news is that only 3% of those units will serve those who are most in need of housing, those who make 30% or less of the area median income. At last week's meeting of the Board of County Commissioners, the assistant to the county manager pointed out that while the national average for availability of housing for people at this extremely low income level is 35 units for every 100 renters, 35 units for every 100 renters. In Mecklenburg County, we have fewer than 30 units for every 100 renters. I think it was awareness of this kind of shortfall and the accompanying grave inequities in our society that led to your letter to the community a year ago. So we continue to press for focused attention to the plight of this population. We think that we must consider the affordable part as well as the housing. With all the building going on in Charlotte, there's plenty of housing. In fact, the availability rate for people at 80% of area median income and higher is in the 90s%. But so many of our hardworking citizens are making only $8 or $9 an hour. These are the people who work at the dollar store, who serve your meals at your favorite lunch place, care for your infants and elderly parents. It's difficult, if not impossible, to build and rent units that would be financially viable at the $300 or $400 a month these people can afford to pay. If they cannot be paid better, which would be my preference, then in order to afford the rent anywhere in Charlotte, they need rent subsidies. So the network is asking that council support the allocation of Housing Trust Fund dollars for these 5 developments and the necessary waivers to the locational policy, and is really asking you to find some separate money to provide rent subsidies for the poorest potential renters, so that 25% of the units will be able to serve that population. We think the state's key program can account for 10% of the subsidy, and we're asking the city to find the 15% remaining, which we estimate to cost about $500. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ford. Appreciate that. And did either of the other two speakers come into the chamber, Ray McKinnon or John Devine? Okay. Okay, Councilor Rajmira?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I'm a strong advocate for affordable housing. Having served on the Charlotte Housing Authority Board for over 2 years, the concern that I have with this proposal, it's that we are only looking at about 19 units that's going to serve less than 30% AMI. And where we have critical need in that AMI, there is over 21,000 units that are needed to serve that population. And I think the proposal that we have doesn't necessarily address that need specifically. And I would like staff to tell us from Housing and Neighborhood Development as to what are some of the steps that we are taking to aggressively address the needs of affordable housing that is below 30% AMI.
Committee discussion.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Pamela Weidman with the city's Housing and Neighborhood Services Department. Thank you all for your continued support of affordable housing. And Ms. Azmir, thank you for your question. We take a number of steps to support the 30% and below. You just took a step when you voted for your Emergency Solutions Grant that you just funded for supportive housing for the men's shelter and for the women's shelter. During your 9% tax credit process, you also have units that are included in that mix. You do have a few here that are included. So the short answer is you take a number of steps to fund the 30% and below population. I'll also remind you of the Away Home Endowment. That's a partnership with the Foundation for the Carolinas and the philanthropic community, and your dollars that go into that fund as well.
So follow up to that, Madam Mayor. So the emergency funding approval that we just did was, it's really a short-term solution. It's not a long-term solution like some of this development would provide.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Those are short-term, correct, up to 2 years, the rapid rehousing.
So in addition to some of the short-term, what are some of the long-term solutions that we are considering to address the needs around 30% AMI? Because when consultants did the presentation, I think about 2 weeks ago, that specifically said the greatest need was around 30% or below AMI.
So two questions I'm hearing. So what do we do to meet the long-term solution? I think the thing that meets the long-term solution in the best way, and I think according to industry standards, is when you can create the units, when the units are created. I want to also remind us that we do that best in partnership with the housing authority and with our developers who do that as well. So it is the actual creation of the unit is probably the best strategy. The consultant, the report, he tried to pack a lot into a few minutes. So what the report said is there is an existing gap for households earning 50% and below the area median income. But you can't just stop there. You have to look at the folks who are also cost burdened. So that's a larger number. And when I say cost burden, that's folks who are paying more than 30% of their area median income for housing. You also can't just plan for the current gap, the gap that exists today. I think it would serve us all well to be planning for the future. So there is a need for folks earning 50% and below, and there's also a need for folks earning between that 50 to 80.
Just one more follow-up. I see that we have a continuous need, specifically around 50 to 80, so that there is a path from 30% as folks move up the ladder. And I understand that. I think that's a great commitment that as a city that we are working towards. What I'm very concerned about is that 3,000 students in CMS are homeless. And we don't have necessarily any recommendation to address that need other than the short-term solution, which is through emergency grant. I think it's about time where we take some bold steps around how we can address some of the needs. And I understand the resources are limited and how much money we have in housing trust dollars. Those are very limited resources. But one of the proposals from the community that I had looked into is that if we have considered some of the development approval with the higher housing trust dollars, if that incorporates 30% or below AMI. Yeah. And I don't know if we have considered that. As I have talked with many developers, the biggest concern that we see is that financing. So that means when we have a clear financing issue with 30% or below units that developer is trying to include, they need more resources from the city to subsidize the cost. And I'm not sure if that's something we have aggressively pursued, but I get that feedback often from developers community as well as the folks. When I recently attended a Heal Charlotte event on Saturday after the shooting last year, there were a lot of folks that were actually living in temporary shelters, sort of like an emergency grant that we just approved in that situation. So there is a real need for the folks that are within that bracket, which is 0 to 30% AMI. And when they come and send us an email, there are no other resources for us to refer to. So I was just wondering if we have looked into some of these other tools necessarily to address that gap and provide more subsidies for those developers that are willing to include 30% or below AMI units.
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Ashmere. I think the short answer is yes, and I think you guys have alluded to it around the dais tonight and in the community when you talk about the need for an increased bond allocation. Developers are willing to provide that. We have to look at it when we talk about increasing our housing bond.
Councilman Driggs?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Getting back to the proposal tonight, I intend to support the bond offering that's talked about. I think it's worth noting that this money will access a 4% program instead of the 9% program. Our issue was that trying to use the 9% program for all of the trust fund dollars was resulting in an accumulation of idle money in the trust fund. Here is a great opportunity to put that money to work. And that's why I do support this. It's not as highly leveraged, it's not as beneficial as if we were able to use the 9% program, but there is just a constraint on the availability of that money with the effect that we had $20 million sitting there doing nothing while we were trying to achieve our goal. So it does also have the effect of creating a lot of deed-restricted housing. And in fact, having deed-restricted housing means that if rents go up faster than incomes, you're going to have housing that is not going up at the same rate. You're going to have housing that remains accessible to those income groups in the future. I do think we need to have a conversation about a stir that was created, frankly, by the data in the research report that we got, highlighting what appeared to be a surplus at the 80% plus level, and this dire shortage. I would just caution us that as you get down to 30%, it starts to get very expensive. And you are, in fact, talking about different social issues. The case in favor of a lot of what we have done was the teachers and the firefighters and all of these very deserving people who had good incomes and couldn't afford to live in Charlotte anymore. And we wanted to help them out. When you get down to 30%, you're into kind of poverty relief, and the economics are different. So I'm sure we're going to have that conversation in committee. But for tonight, given that we can do this using money that we have that is idle right now without any impact on our tax rates, it should be emphasized, because this is actually within the scope of our existing contributions to the Housing Trust Fund from bond issuance every 2 years, I will recommend and vote for this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Fallon?
Yeah. Pam, question. When I served on Housing Trust, I was under the impression we could not subsidize rents with a direct subsidy.
So you are correct, Ms. Fallon. The housing trust fund dollars, which are your bond dollars, is used for construction, for capital.
Only, right.
Perhaps so you're right, it is used for capital.
Yeah, because if I recall, we did talk about that, but we could not give direct subsidies because it became a matter of who gets them, who doesn't, how do we define it?
You cannot do that with your housing trust fund dollars. Right. You are correct.
Thank you. Well, that raises a question.
Okay. Councilor Isel.
No, go ahead.
So that, I guess that raises the question, the 500,000 for 10, for 10 years that was mentioned, it has to come from a different pot.
Right, so so that would have to come from a rental subsidy. It could come from a federal source, it could come from a local source, just not your housing trust fund dollars, which are used for capital.
Okay, and so does that exist right now?
So we receive home dollars from the federal government. Home dollars can be used for tenant-based rental subsidy, and they are currently used in this community for tenant-based rental subsidy. Some of the dollars that you just approved from the Emergency Solutions Grant are being used for tenant-based rental subsidy. And then you have your Away Home Endowment that is being endowed. That's your partnership with the Foundation for the Carolinas that can be used for rental subsidy when it's fully endowed.
So when we have that discussion and we look at what's available for that subsidy, I don't think we can, I think that's an opportunity to include in the discussion the phenomena that we're seeing right now, and that's whole apartment complexes getting eviction letters with 30 days notice. And now we're all scrambling to figure out what to do for these people, because these aren't the wealthy apartments that are getting evicted. The apartment renters, these are not wealthy renters that are getting evicted. They're the bottom of the pile. So, you know, I think that we're going to have to really look at what else we can do for individuals that, through no fault of their own, have been given 30-day eviction notices. I think we know 3 buildings right now that are going through that. And perhaps we could have a broader conversation about those lowest rents, that if we have a 4% vacancy rate throughout the city, and I think that's of all apartments, then certainly at $675 a month, it'd be interesting to know what that number is. It's probably 0.
It will be a challenge for us, right? So to find the housing units, and I would also encourage us, and we can have a deeper dive with this in committee, is to not just look at the housing. Housing is not the silver bullet. It's how do we help people along the educational route, and it's how do we help people improve their opportunity for earnings.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I want to follow up to Councilmember Eisel's comments about the issue that we're having with the displacement of people as a result of the investment and the growth in our community. But first, I want to say thank you to the committee for doing this work. You've worked really hard. I know it's been difficult. We've always looked at the 9%. We've always tried to make every dollar, you know, bring back 11 or 12. And at some point, you guys stepped up, and I want to say thank you for stepping up to say, let's move forward, because we've got to do something about this issue. So to the committee, thank you very much. And then the second thing that I want to say is that I would add to what the mayor said about a referral to you, just to give you another task. Let's talk to the Housing Authority about the impact of the federal policy changes on rents, where you're having where we have vouchers that are probably not going to increase in number, and that the local authority now has to repair and maintain the units that are on the ground. And what does that mean for our organization, for our city? And the Housing Authority has basically been framing it as, well, then if we have this program, then we need to bill market rate to solve our problem. I wonder if there are alternative solutions, so I'd ask the committee to actually look at that. But more importantly, right now, I do think there's a crisis where we are losing apartments to development and growth, and people are getting 30 days to move. And sometimes I think at the Woodscape, they've probably given them now 45. But when you're paying $600 a month rent, when there's no elasticity in the system, then that's going to be very difficult. It reminds me of the model that we have with Crisis Assistance Ministry, which actually provides rents to keep people in their homes. And what we, I think, have an opportunity to do is pull together the partnerships that work with us currently. So I'm going to ask if it's okay for the manager to come back with an idea around how to address that issue. Mm-hmm. We've got Crisis Assistance Ministry, we've got Charlotte Family Housing, we've got Community Link, and then in addition to that, I can't ever remember what to call socialserve.com. What is it called now?
Housing Charlotte.
Housing Charlotte. All of these folks deal with this type of issue to keep people from being homeless. I know if you're paying $600 and the rent goes up, and we've all gotten a copy of a letter from a young, I guess a senior who said, I'm on fixed income, my rent just went up $100. He's going to be homeless for a $100 subsidy. He's paying $600, and he wants to pay that. but for $100, he's going to be evicted because he can no longer afford the rent. Or in the case of these Brittany Woods, which we all saw on WBT, thanks to Molly Grantham for doing that story, and as well the Woodscape Apartments and what's going on. So I'd like to actually have a coordinated conversation with our nonprofit partners facilitated by the city so that we can get a handle on what is going to be done in this area so that we prevent homelessness versus waiting until it occurs.
That's fine.
Councilmember Smith.
Real quickly, I want to, before I talk about this, I want to congratulate our Boy Scouts. I think this is the longest the Scout troop has stayed here since I've been on council. So if you're working for one merit badge, maybe the troop leader might give you two. So y'all are seeing a great lessons in civics tonight. So thank you for sticking around. I want to make two quick points. One is, I think one way we can start to tackle the crisis we're talking about is the ability to free up our funds quicker. And so what happens is the private sector, the hedge funds, whoever comes in to purchase these units that are aging, they don't have the capital restraints we do. They are able to move quicker. And I think there would be opportunities for the Housing Trust to purchase some of these and then in turn come back with the deed restrictions. But we need to figure out how to make it more nimble. And so that might be worth adding on to the mayor's, to everything that's going to Lawana's committee.
May I ask, Kenny, would a broker actually make that happen better for us? And is that one way? Or I've heard that, so
I don't think the broker would make it more helpful. I think it takes us longer to go through the process to distribute the funds. Whereas you're going to have an underwriter in New York or wherever this hedge fund is. They're going to sit down and say, we can pay X, we can deliver Y, and they make it happen. So if there's any way for that to get into the conversation on this, whether it's manager or mayor, that'd be great. And then two, I just want to take 1 second to add, my strong preference would be that this were a one-item vote tonight and that we relook at our housing locational policy and we pass it tonight, but that we're taking areas off the map that we could have included. And so instead of having to take this an A-B solution, let's look at the locational policy, and this can be something maybe for a future council, but look at the locational policy and have it more reflective of a lot of the product that is being brought to market today. I think when the policy was initially created, it was for a different model of affordable housing, and really, I mean, you look at some of the product like we did on Hebron last year, it was 75% brick. It looked better and was probably more quality construction than some aging units in South Park. Anyway, this is great historic night for council. We're fulfilling an obligation, not an obligation, a commitment we made to the community. I'm proud to join my colleagues in this, and good stuff. Thank you for your hard work, and thank you, Luana.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And I'll just take a quick moment just to remind you that the two strategies that you just mentioned, they are a part of the larger strategy. So a quicker rental acquisition program for purchasers, and then also we'll be bringing back a revised housing locational policy through that work. So thank you so much.
Thank you all for your hard work.
Councilor Mayfield?
Thank you, Mayor.
This is like your dream night.
It is. I will say again, I am thankful to the committee, and I'm particularly thankful to Ms. Whiteman in your role from the beginning when we were talking about the what ifs and can this be done. I do want to make sure that not only the fact that council's on the same page, but that the community also truly understands that a lot of times, if you're not on the committee, even though some members are on the committee, you don't get the chance to have this deeper conversation. So that's why you're hearing a lot of concerns and ideas being shared. When we think of the recommendation that I believe myself and my vice chair, we nodded to each other that we completely respect and welcome to come to the committee. When we think about that 3% and we look at the idea of 25%, understanding that's not saying 25% in each individual development, that's looking at an example. We have 5 developments here. What would 25% of that total? Because one of the things that I have said repeatedly in community, in individual conversation, a lot is lost in translation, so therefore other people take my no as I am anti. Well, Ms. Ford and I have been working on housing and the affordability of housing long before I sat in this seat and had a vote. But I think we need to recognize that concentrated poverty is what put us in this place, and we have to look at how do we support truly diverse development. But yes, if we can push to get more, I think we have more ability and more leeway. And tonight's movement forward with the allocation of these funds truly does lean into that desire from a council, but also recognizing community. You get a new council every other year. So you risk the chance. What I'm proud of is this committee and this council chose to make a very bold move with allocating funds. I also, on the same line, my colleagues mentioned two recent developments that are happening locally. I've already spoken to not only the mayor, my vice chair, but also Ms. Wyman about a recommendation to our committee. But just to give you an idea, because when we talk about this, for a lot of people, it's abstract. So let's just really look at what one of these letters look like. So my colleague mentioned Brittany Woods management team transition. So you sent out a letter on September 15th saying, hey, we're pleased to announce that we have assumed management of Brittany Woods effective September 15th, 2017. So the date it is that is dated is the date that they effectively assume responsibility. We are passionate about bringing people and places together, and we will continue to make your experience at Brittany Woods an amazing one. Like with any change, there is a bit of information we need to share with you regarding what happens next. This individual will continue to be your on-site representative. They will be available if you have any questions. If you have not already made your September rent payment, you may submit a check or money order to the management office. That sounds very reasonable. Sounds like you shouldn't panic yet. Interesting enough, the very next letter is a very different one that basically says that, okay, that same management person we told you to reach out to, because what we're not thinking about is the reality of some of these people have been in these homes for many years. So I have an individual where now, September 18, 2017, they receive a notice, request for possession of apartment. And this was delivered by hand, by U.S. mail. Thank you for being a resident of Brittany Woods. We appreciate your residency and contribution to the community. We are preparing to make significant improvements to the property that require a large amount of construction on the exterior and interiors of each building. The nature of the construction is such that it cannot be done safely with residents living on the property. Now, how many times have we seen and heard of we're going to move you so that we can make something brand new? Yep. Okay, we've seen that. So when we think about this idea of, well, we need to get more at this percentage, I agree we need to diversify it, but to the extent of what? Please accept this letter as formal notice to you by the owner of Oakhurst Apartments that your lease expired. Now, mind you, this person has been in this unit, but their lease technically expired February 28, 2013. But we have a lot of complexes that really, you've lived there, you've had an agreement with your management, because this is actually the third individual that I've had a conversation like this. You paid your rent on time, but you don't have a lease. Just like with these and family members, most of us in here, mostly minorities, grandmama left the house. We didn't really get them to sign the paperwork over. It's just been in the family. Now somebody comes along and they challenge you, your authority to be there. Well, your lease expired as of February 28, 2013. Pursuant to paragraph 2 on your lease, it's now 2017, mind you, this letter has been written and delivered to give you sufficient notice of our request for possession of your apartment on the 31st day of October, which is at least 30 days from the receipt of this letter. If you desire to vacate earlier, we will prorate your rent. So with letters like, because a lot of times, again, we have these conversations, but we don't have the actual language, so do we know what the reality of this looks like? So with that, I'm asking my colleagues to allow me to add this additional conversation to Ms. Wyman. It looks like we are going to have a meeting on the 27th, even though we thought we might not, either unless we really think we can push out everything that was suggested today for our October meeting, because there's some clear things that we need to address as a community. I don't know what our answer is, but as the Housing and Neighborhood Development Committee, as local government, trying to figure out how we're going to fund all of these requests and all of this support, how do we address when 85 to 150 people are told you need to move? And now they're going to be asking us for assistance. So I would like to have my colleagues' support for us to add this to that little list that has been made for housing and neighborhood development. Hopefully we will get to it before the end of 2017. I just threw out the 24th, because I just like that date of whenever we were supposed to have our next meeting. If we can't make it by the end, I'm thinking the October, but we need to expand, and again, if it's okay with my colleagues, if you will allow me to have privilege to add an additional item without us having to necessarily do a vote, unless, Mayor, that's your preference, I would really appreciate that.
Is this to your committee?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
Call the question.
Call the question.
Councilor Fallon, do you have one last
I have a
comment?
question. Ms. Swindman, people that come here, all right, and that's what troubles me, because I don't know if we're ever going to be able to catch up. Is it true, the statistic, that of the people coming here, some of what we need to do is 55% those people need us help in housing?
So, Ms. Fallon, I don't have an exact percentage on the statistic of people moving here, how many of them need affordable housing. What I can tell you is that we get about 44 new residents per day to Charlotte. We can perhaps do some digging to see if we can get you an answer on that. I don't want to make you a promise that I can't keep. But I think it is reasonable to say that some of those people do need affordable housing.
We're not allowed to have lists of the people living here first, so that they would take precedent.
No, generally when people, no, I don't think we can have people who have lived here take precedent. There is some questions that they have to fill out on their lease agreement. They have to show, they have to show credit and those type of things, but I don't think we can do that.
Because what troubles me is we're never going to be able to keep up.
I think the city, and I always say this, the city government alone won't solve the problem. That is why we need the partnerships. We need partnerships from the market rate community. We need partnerships from our colleagues at the county and CMS. I think both steps like you're taking tonight, we can move the needle further than we've moved it in the past. But this is, and I'll remind us that affordable housing is not just a crisis for Charlotte. This is happening in growing, prosperous, urbanizing cities across the country. And I will remind you that the city of Charlotte is doing some great things, and you all are doing some aggressive things that other cities are looking to. So you are a best practice city. That's not to say we need to rest on our laurels, but we are not the only one that's having this situation, and you have some very unique tools that you are using and that you can expand the use of.
Thank you.
Okay. We had a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great discussion. Thank you so much, Ms. Weidman. Next, we move on to item number 15, our urban forest master plan.
Whether it's private or
And this one. Councilmember Kinsey chairs the Environment Committee, and you wanted to say a few words about this.
Yeah, as you are well aware, we did have a report at our dinner meeting this evening, and we have I guess it was in 2011 when we adopted the 50% canopy plan by the year 2050. A plan was needed to guide staff and the community to find out the best way to maintain not only our existing canopy, but to protect our trees that we plant. Over the last year, we have been developing the plan with involvement from the community. Over 1,800 online surveys were completed, 3 community meetings were held, and 4 stakeholder meetings were held. The plan will be a guide for the city, pre-Charlotte, the community, and our partners to create new programs to enhance our canopy. And so, with that said, I'm going to move adoption of the plan, and I want to thank staff for working on this. And I also want to thank the committee, Ms. Ajmira, Ms. Fallon, and Mr. Austin. Mr. Mitchell is also on it, but unfortunately he was not there the day that we voted, but it was a unanimous vote. So with that, I move approval.
Second. Okay. We actually have someone signed up to speak to this as well. Dave Molinaro? I didn't see him in the audience, but he did sign up. Okay, so, looks like our speaker's not here, so are there any comments or questions from council? Okay, I appreciate the folks who gave us the update at the dinner meeting and said that we are on track to hit the 50 by 50, but we gotta work really hard to do it.
Yeah.
It's not a given without everybody participating.
Well, and they did mention we would be getting more data that will help us plan going forward. So we look forward to having that.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Councilor McKenzie. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and that plan is adopted, and too bad the Boy Scouts aren't here still. They can go out and plant trees. That's another scouting badge. I know, my son did that. Lots of opportunities. The next item is number 16, Camp North End Infrastructure Reimbursement. And this is to authorize the city manager to reimburse an amount not to exceed $15 million for public infrastructure improvements with the, through the 2016 Community Investment Plan in the North End, the Smart District. Councilor Mitchell, who's chair of the committee, is not here, but we do have, yes, we have some comments, and then we have staff here if we need to as well. Councilor Isolt.
So, thank you, Mayor. So I am doing this in place of Councilmember Mitchell, who is chair of this committee and unfortunately is not feeling well tonight. This request is for an infrastructure reimbursement plan for Camp North End, which is the ATCO development in the Applied Innovation Corridor. It's a very exciting project that Council approved the rezoning for on September 18th of this year. And it'll include up to 760,000 square feet of office space, 65,000 square feet of retail, and 600 residential units over the next 10 years. And those residential units, 42 will be reserved for housing earning less than 80% of the area median income. The total estimated private investment over 10 years will equal approximately $350 million, and of that, it will generate approximately $1.7 million in annual city property tax revenue into an area that we're really excited about, that will really welcome this reinvestment. Councilmember Kinsey and Ivory's districts. So with that, on August 17th, the Economic Development Committee voted unanimously, and I'm sorry that I wasn't there, date got changed, to recommend to the City Council approval of the infrastructure reimbursement agreement not to exceed $15 million for public infrastructure projects. And what that is, it means that the developer will build the public improvements, streetscapes and extensions of Sylvania Avenue, and they will be reimbursed upon completion of specific milestones through our community investment plan. That work will include a minimum 10% MWSBE utilization for all the public infrastructure, and it'll also be using our workforce development project, the Project Peace, which is a partnership for inclusive employment and career experience. So with that, I'd like to make a motion to authorize the city manager to negotiate and execute an infrastructure reimbursement agreement in the amount not to exceed $15 million for public infrastructure improvements consistent with the terms set forth below, which will be reimbursed through the 2016 Community Investment Plan.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. And this was, we approved the zoning last week, a week ago. Yep. Mayor Pro Tem.
I just wanted to follow up. I had the opportunity to go to a session over, actually, I think Mr. Braxton was there and I was there at North End, and I just wanted to say that I had a chance to meet the community development officer that's been employed, and the work that's being done. It is a phenomenal space, and it has so much to offer in the community. I think that we have, if we can retain just the flavor and the sense of that, it will make a huge difference in what we're developing. I was a little bit frightened because whenever you have that kind of new development, it often brings a lot of what I would call suburban feel to it. I just don't know if that's possible if we stay true to the plan that has been presented by APCO. I do want to see if we can continue, and Patsy Kinsey said this last time when we had this discussion. She said there are two issues here. The housing and the protection of the neighborhoods is a separate issue than the development, and I appreciate that. I listened well, and I don't know what those overlay districts, which I know Ms. Kinsey also says don't ever do that because it'll screw things up. But at some point, I just really like to ask the planning staff to tell us, what do we do to protect those neighborhoods that surround this development to make sure that people that have lived there can enjoy that experience? And so that's the request I would make, and look forward to seeing this happen, and look forward to how it can make a difference, and can this be the quality of development for everyone, not just those that come in to grow it and to be new. And so I appreciate that and support this wholeheartedly.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I want to just remind folks, because we're looking at bringing opportunity to every part of our city and working very hard to bridge gaps. The 8 fragile neighborhoods around Camp North End and the North End Smart District have an unemployment rate of 28%. And that is something that this targeted public investment is going to help change that narrative. And hope some of the companies and things to come in the future will also be working to get summer youth interns. And junior achievement is planned to go in there as well. So it's going to be a very active part of our city, and really pleased to see this investment happening. Any other comments? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Next, item 17, River District infrastructure reimbursement. And Councilor Iselt, do you have on this too?
Thank you, Mayor. So the Economic Development Committee's been very busy. We've got a lot of very exciting projects, and this one is really big. The River District, which is a 1,380-acre development west of the airport that is part of the Dixie Berry Hill Plan, and again, utilizing the Community Investment Plan and part of Charlotte Douglas International's planning initiative. So the River District, which the council approved the rezoning for on November 16th, will provide a unique master development opportunity for office, retail, hotel, and a variety of residential uses. Phase 1 of this project will include up to 1 million square feet of office, 75,000 square feet of retail, 150 hotel rooms, 815 residential units, 85 of which will be earning 80% of the, or below, of the area median income. Also, in the August Economic Development Committee meeting, the committee unanimously agreed to support the infrastructure reimbursement requests, and that's what this particular motion will be about. So before I do that, Mayor Pro Tem Lyles wanted to make a couple comments about this project.
So, Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, thank you. When we had this project presented to us, I really had a question around the idea of how we could create economic opportunity with a project that was so great. It's going to be one of those things that's going to create almost a new city. There'll probably be a number of places that won't be as large as our River District. And yet at the same time, I realize that when you have this kind of new development, it's kind of what I guess they call virgin development, that you have the opportunity to talk about it in a different way. And we've done a number of things with that. We've done the zoning. We've talked about this ability to put in public infrastructure and the phasing of the project. But I was concerned, and I will say frankly, I've been very concerned about the idea that when we have public money going into a project that makes it possible for overall private development to be successful, that we actually talk about it in with the concept around economic opportunity. And I've been pushing and saying, what can we do to create jobs? What can we do to create not only jobs, but business participation by minority women and small business enterprises? And I would just like to ask Brian Leary with Crescent to address a question around this, because we talked about it and the words were kind of, we're going to facilitate, we're going to develop, and today I had an opportunity to speak with both Crescent and Lincoln Harris representatives, and would you please comment on what you have evolved in for the Minority and Small Business Action Plan on the project?
Absolutely. Good evening. My name is Brian Leary. I have the pleasure to lead Crescent's commercial and mixed-use business. Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. And I just want to make it, Madam Clerk, it's okay for him to speak even though he's not signed up. Okay. Just want to make sure, yes.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of Council, it's an honor to be up here. First and foremost, thank you for your passionate and unwavering commitment to make Charlotte the best place for all Charlotteans, from the River District to the north end to particularly the west side, which we're particularly happy to be trying to make the River District happen there. A couple things. First and foremost, when we came to you about rezoning this large swath of property that will add a whole bunch of trees to the canopy, by the way, when it comes in and is annexed, you were very clear that this had to be something different. And the way that you negotiated, deliberate word, the rezoning, you created a phasing plan that in some ways could represent the largest downzoning in the history of Charlotte, meaning we were counting on a true public partner in the city, and in some cases the county, to work with us to deliver infrastructure, primarily transportation infrastructure, over the next 30 years. If we don't have that partnership and that infrastructure doesn't happen, we stop at phase one. And phase one is a very small part to what we're talking about. And when we talk about phase one, here we are tonight talking about the infrastructure that's so necessary, the transportation infrastructure, the mobility infrastructure to build out this robust and inclusive place. And so first and foremost, we've made a commitment, and that'll be codified and then will be accounted for through reporting year in, year out on the public infrastructure that the private developers will build to have a 10% commitment of minority and small business inclusion. We have also heard loud and clear from Mayor Pro Tem and council members as well, particularly District 3 leads us in the right direction, that we need to hear something on the private infrastructure side as well. And so we'd like to have a 10% goal. These are floors, these are baselines, these are minimums for private infrastructure to be minority and small business included as well. We've already been working with third-party consultants. We've not done this before here in Charlotte, and so we're working with Lowell & Associates. Stephanie Burwalk is here to keep us straight and to outline a full master plan for doing this. We've already had a August 2nd contractor roundtable session, first and foremost to engage, and it'll be a year-long and every year process. And at the end of every year, we report back, and we're going to be held accountable first and foremost by you all and everyone behind us and the citizens, because every year that we report and we reference how we're doing and how we're going to do better or different the next year. When we're done at phase one, if we haven't lived up to our side, you have the ultimate ability to stop us from moving on to phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. So we appreciate the opportunity to lead on this, to provide both commitments to the public infrastructure, but then also provide a 10% goal on the private infrastructure as well, and come back to you and publish our progress every year.
Thank you, Brian. I want to say, and I said this earlier, when you have two of the developers of the caliber and homegrown, I like to say, and you have the opportunity to really begin to build economic opportunity with business participation as well as employment, that is going to make a big difference in the way that we move our city forward, and it sets an example for other organizations that come to us. And I want to say that I would like very much to say thank you for listening, but more importantly, thank you for being the community partner that you're being to do this, where we're addressing economic opportunity. And I would then like to say that if we can incorporate the commitments into the negotiation of item, I think it's item C, that says authorize the city manager to negotiate, well, that's the water line. So I think it's B, to authorize and execute the infrastructure reimbursement agreement to incorporate both the minority and women business participation goals for infrastructure for both the city as well as the private sector and jobs. I'm looking forward to a great success and a long-term partnership. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Leary. Thank you. Councilmember Driggs?
Yes, I wanted to say, for the benefit of people who look at these partnerships somewhat anxiously as to their terms, in my view, in some instances, the terms of a partnership like this are greatly beneficial to us, and there are other times when I come down saying that I don't think they are. In this case, half of the money that's being put in is from community investment dollars that we had already committed to this area. It's part of funds that we had in our bond plan, again, within the scope of our existing tax structure, and was going to be used there. What we've done essentially as to that portion is just harmonize an investment infrastructure we were going to make anyway with this tremendous new development. The other portion is an incentive grant structure, which essentially means that the private investor will fund public infrastructure and will get paid back if and only if new tax revenues are generated by this development that cover 2 times over the amount of that investment. So I think the leverage is tremendous here in terms of the private investment that's being driven by these 2 facilities, and I really appreciate, in fact, the work that developers have done in order to give us a concept that is large-scale and coordinated and not kind of piecemeal sprawl going out in that direction, and therefore I will be voting for this. Thank you.
Councilmember Schmier?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I appreciate developers' commitment to economic opportunities when it comes to minority, women, and small enterprises. I think that's the model that we want to use moving forward as we talk about economic opportunities and economic mobility. And this is the first time I believe that I have seen where we are using even 10% commitment to even the private investment. And I think that says a lot to a developer's commitment to type of opportunities that they want to provide. And with that, I would also support this project.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for supporting my project.
There you go.
We're going to all claim this. We're not going to have you have Asheville North, Asheville East, Asheville West.
Right. So, Councilmember Isolt?
So I'd like to make a 3-part motion to authorize the city manager to negotiate and execute an infrastructure reimbursement agreement in the amount not to exceed $15 million for public infrastructure improvements consistent with the terms set forth below, which will be reimbursed through 45% of incremental city property taxes from a designated area over 10 years or until fully reimbursed, whichever occurs first.
You want to do it all B?
Oh, I can. Oh, sorry. A, B, and C.
Second.
I don't get to do these that much.
It's all there on the screen. You got it. Okay, so the motion is for A, B, and C. There's a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Very good. Our next item, we're doing a lot of economic development. You're absolutely right. Our next item this evening is the Charlotte Convention Center Phase 1 improvements. And there is an A and B on this one as well.
Did we do the Nation Road? You forgot Arrowwood Road.
There's a revised interlocal agreement on the dais. The only revision was to the term of the agreement, number 8, but I just wanted to point that out, that it's on the dais, the attachment for this, number 18. It was already in the agenda, they just changed one thing on number 8.
Okay, I'm not seeing that.
You mean the handout?
Oh, this one right here? Yes, ma'am. Okay. So this is, okay, so this is part of item 18.
Correct.
Okay. So this is the interlocal agreement for the renovations.
What?
Okay. And here it comes. So we have an A and a B in this as well. This is the interlocal agreement to reimburse the Charlotte Regional Visitors Authority up to $8.5 million for design development and an allocation of $110 million for the Convention Center Tax Fund debt capacity for the expansion project. And this is also an item that we have seen more fully explained in a dinner meeting. Are there any, is someone able to make a motion?
Mayor?
Approval.
Mayor?
Okay. Yes, Mr.
I just noticed something. Interlocal agreements require a resolution, so if the mover of the motion will include approval of a resolution or adoption of a resolution approving an interlocal agreement, and then we will clean that up.
That's exactly what I said.
There you go. And is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All right, so Madam Clerk, you got that? Yes. All right, we've got the right motion in place. Any discussion? I think that having traveled to other cities that have great convention centers and complexes, this is going to be tremendous for our ability to continue to attract conventions and to continue to grow that business. I want to thank the Regional Visitors Authority for all the work they put into this and all the folks on staff who've helped look into the future of what Charlotte can continue to do and to bring here in terms of conventions and events. We're going to be making sure that we're competitive and that our convention center is up to date. And 1 out of 9 of our jobs is related to tourism. So the tourism industry is very important. So we had a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Next we move on to item 19. And that is the North Tryon Street Business Corridor Project. And there's an A and a B for a contract to Sealand Contractors for the construction of that business corridor project and to appropriate $4.3 million from the budget, from existing appropriations in the general CIP.
Move approval of A and B.
Second.
And their A and B is written, Mr. Attorney? We're good. Okay. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So that project will move forward and help North Tryon development. We also, number 20, now we have a two-part motion to Arrowwood Road and Nations Ford Road intersection improvements. And this is a construction contract to Sealand Contractors for the Arrowwood Road and Nations Ford Road intersection improvement, and also a budget ordinance to appropriate the money.
It said it.
And the total amount is $1.752 million for this.
Is this in consent, Mayor?
It says consent item.
It says consent. Well, my computer died, so I don't know if it's consent.
It's a consent item.
It is a consent.
This item.
It is a consent item, yeah.
Aye.
It was incorrectly labeled. Okay, it's not a consent item. Okay, I thought it was under business. So was that a motion?
Move to
Counsel?
approve.
Second.
Okay. We had 6 people. Any discussion? Councilmember Mayfield?
Thank you, Mayor. I would just like to note that I want to thank staff. The neighborhoods, several neighborhoods, part of the Swan Southwest Area Neighborhood Association, have been looking forward to these improvements for many years. These discussions have been happening, so I am glad that we are finally awarding the construction contract this evening and moving forward with these intersection improvements. And we actually, we have a community meeting coming up in early October where a number of staff will be in attendance. So if any of the residents would like any specifics regarding tonight's decision, they will be able to have those answered in an upcoming community meeting that's going to be talking about what's happening throughout the area, and that will, as far as I know of now, will be at the Aubrey Glen Recreational Center, and as we get closer, then I will announce the date and time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. And next we move on to appointments. And I understand that the clerk has one appointment that has been voted on, and Madam Clerk?
Yes, Mayor, we had one nominee, Jeff Beaver, for Charlotte, Keep Charlotte Beautiful, received 6 votes, which is the minimum votes to be appointed. So he's appointed, and we'll bring back all the other appointments to the October 9th meeting when there's a full council, since no one else received 6 votes.
Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
I know that there, on the Capital Fund, Charlotte Community Capital Fund, there was a person with 5 votes, and I didn't vote on that, so I'd be willing to make that 6. So if that's okay with everyone, do we have to call for hand raising to do that?
Yep.
Okay with that.
Okay, so.
Okay, so for the Charlotte Community Capital Loan Fund, we have Corey Busker and Kimberly Edmonds. Corey Busker, okay. So, all those in favor of Corey Busker, raise your hand. Okay. All right, so that was unanimous, so we got.
Thank you.
There we go. So we got one more appointment made tonight.
Okay,
Because
appreciate
they
it.
got very close to the 6 needed.
Zoning also.
Okay, but there are 2 appointments under zoning.
One got 5.
Okay. All right, so, Madam Clerk will bring those back to us next time.
That's right.
Mayor.
Councilmember Smith.
Question, I know that protocol, if you're gonna send it back, could we hear the vote tally for Keep Charlotte Beautiful? I know we have somebody here that applied and they're still here, so I'm just curious.
Oh, sure. Jeff Beaver received 6 votes. Jesse Boyd received 2 votes. Tanya Clarkston received 2 votes. Sue Duchanis received 5 votes. Myra Foster received 2 votes. Jordan McGee received 1 vote, and Jita Patel received 2 votes.
And there are 2 more appointments under that.
That's right.
Can we take
So all of those folks, except for Jeff Beaver, will be brought back for consideration on the 9th.
we want to move forward.
So, Councilmember Smith,
I was gonna say,
do you make a
is
motion?
there some, I'd like to make a motion that we vote on Sue. Is there somebody willing to change one of the votes from the 1 or 2 people?
No, I've already voted for it. Let's just raise our
Or
hand.
can we just,
Okay, so, Sue Duchesnoy, I can never say that.
Sue, hi.
All those in favor, raise your hand.
Okay, what are we voting for?
just raise your, yes, 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 I love it. Just raise your hand.
Okay.
I mean, we are appointing Sue, okay.
Sue, okay, so we've got, so that's 8 votes for Sue is also appointed for Keep Charlotte Beautiful. So we had Jeff Beaver and Sue Duchesnoy. Thank you for
Sticking it out.
sticking it out to the very end.
Nice to Mr.
Twice.
Beaver.
Sometimes it pays off to stay to the very end. And so you'll have to bring back 1 appointment for that one next time.
Thank you very much.
All right, so we
Thank
got a
y'all.
few of them. No, thank you, that makes absolute sense. And for those watching, it is because we are down 2 council members this evening, and it just makes it a little bit more difficult for appointments, but we'll look forward to doing those next time. Hopefully we'll have folks back. Okay. I think that's the end of our regular agenda, and now we turn to mayor and council topics, starting with Councilmember Ivory. Any topic for the good of the community?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Councilor Ajmira.
I'm good, thank you.
You're good. Councilor Driggs.
I'm cool.
Councilor Kinsey. Councilor Fallon.
Good night. We did a good job tonight without me.
Councilor Isel.
Gonna blow the run.
Thank you.
Hey,
All
I'm
right,
not gonna.
well, I'm gonna be a spoil sport. And I just want to, there were a number of events last week in recognition of our being 1 year from the events of September 2016. And I just want to thank the number of folks who put together healing and unity and positive events. I went to the Heal Charlotte event on Saturday. Great mixing of police and community leaders and officials and kids, all kinds of activities. And I just want to appreciate the community. I know Heal Charlotte wasn't the only organization. There were a number of organizations that were working to continue to recognize we have gaps, we have disparities, but we can all do something positive to help bridge those gaps and pull people together. And I also want to appreciate our police officers, Chief Putney, and all that they have done in the past year in community policing, and again, for being a lot of places over the last week on panels and community meetings and groups, working very hard to bring our community together, and we have made tremendous progress. So I just wanted to give a shout out to all the folks who helped make that happen. Sorry to break the the trend of not having much to say, but,
maybe that's enough said. Thank you,
enough
Jennifer.
said. Okay. Councilmember Smith.
I'm breaking the trend too, because I want to wish LaWanna happy anniversary. She just got back from her cruise.
Oh,
and,
yes, there we go.
She didn't want to take me. I was like, I'm in. We'll come. Bridget and I will come if you want us to go.
Next
And
time.
apparently, no. Apparently, that's not how you want to celebrate.
Double date anniversary cruise.
But I did
don't
want
think
to.
so.
Congratulations.
Councilmember
Have a great week, everyone.
All right, thank you very much. Good meeting.
like my tree.
We stand adjourned.
Our first year, 1 year.
No, I won't memorize, I'll read it.